Yeah, so it was about 4 years ago. I was sitting out on the beach where I lived. Before I lived up here in Manoa, I lived out on the beach out on the west side of Oahu. And I'm sitting there with my cup of coffee. My son's playing in the water. My wife's back in the house with my other boy. And one of my other boys, the other one's growing out. And I'm listening to a podcast. And even though I'm listening to the podcast, I'm listening to this guy's story. And then it rings into my head this conversation that my wife would always have with me over the years. What the hell are you chasing? I was always after that 6 and 7 figure income. And I'd be at work, come home, put on a suit, go sell Amway. Come home, go sell USANA Health Sciences. Come home, go try to start some other business, satellite business. Go start some other business, start some other thing. Always trying to get into where I'm, having this life of freedom and all this stuff. And then I look around and it all came, it was like it just all came in. And I was like, you know what? I have I made it 6-figure income at that point, and nothing had changed in my mind. I was still chasing it. But, oh, by the way, I'm not out in the water playing with my kid. I was sitting on the gazebo listening to a podcast to learn how to make more money and to learn how to be successful and to learn how to make it. And I'm using air quotes for those of you who aren't on video. And then my son's out there and he's like, Dad, come and play. And I'm like, no, let me, do this. I'm listening. I shut it off. I just put it down, put it on the table, went out and played with the kid, went back to the house. I can get emotional about this. It was a very real event.
From cave drawings to family histories to stories around the fire, humans crave order among chaos, connection amid isolation. So we tell stories. Our mission at the Storytellers Network is to bring the art of story to the masses. Whether you're in marketing, you're an entrepreneur, or you're developing your own personal brand, telling your story effectively can make the difference between celebrating milestones and collecting unemployment. The Storytellers Network strives to help storytellers tell their stories so you can learn from the best. Now, your host, the inbound evangelist himself, Dan Moyle.
So welcome to the Storytellers Network podcast. I'm glad you're joining me today. In this episode, I talk with a guy who's living a life of abundance in Hawaii with his consulting business and his podcast. This guy is awesome. He's also a writer, so this guy's definitely a storyteller. And I had an absolutely amazing time with him on this show, and I hope you enjoy listening to the host of Men of Abundance, Wally Carmichael, as he shares his story with you. Now, before we get into today's conversation, just a reminder to visit thestorytellersnetwork.com for more resources, how to contact us, and for past episodes as well, all hopefully to help you tell your story more effectively. And if you like what we're doing here, please consider leaving us a review. It does help us reach new storytellers, and consider sharing us all over the place. Now, let's get to the stories. So thanks so much for joining me, Wally Carmichael, man. I'm happy to have you on board. As you say, man, aloha. Welcome to the show.
Aloha. It's my pleasure, brother. Listen, man, seriously, I do not take it lightly to be on anybody's show and have the honor to talk to their audience, but to be on your show and to be on the Storytellers, blown away, brother. I was absolutely excited when you sent me the message and invited me on, and it's just an honor to be here, man.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been listening to your show, as I mentioned in the intro, Men of Abundance, for a while. I was blessed to be on your show as a guest, but then just listening is so much fun, and I love the stories that you tell. So I got to believe you consider yourself a storyteller, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening earlier to one of your shows with who was that? Kevin Miller, and I kind of think I was a bad storyteller for a very, very long time. I was that guy that would sit and just elaborate on every little thing. But what I've learned through podcasting, I think, and through some other stuff is there's a time and a place to tell your story. And then, of course, how to tell your story makes a big difference on who you're telling your story to and why. So I guess I could be a storyteller, but really with my podcast, I'm more of a share stories, and I allow a platform for others to share their stories, and many of them are very good stories and very good storytellers. And then on the marketing side of what I do, I help business owners tell their story in a particular way, depending on where they're telling their story at. So it's a skill from top to bottom, and it's really an art. I love it.
Well, what I've learned so far over 20 some shows is that, like, as much as I consider myself a storyteller, I love the idea that not only are we storytellers, but we're story curators, right? We help others tell their stories. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's true even when you're having general conversation. You think of people like, I'm not going to get into the political side of anything, but look at somebody like President Reagan, who was known as a great communicator, but he asked questions. He was interested in the people. Same thing as Bill Clinton. When he came into a room, he made people feel amazing. And it was because he helped people tell their story through the way he communicated. And I think, man, that's just brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to kind of start off, and we've already started, but we'll restart, I guess. No, I like to start off by talking about location, because I think that, in some businesses and some walks of life, you have to be in certain places. But as storytellers, and particularly this season, podcasters, and you can be anywhere. So let's share with the Storytellers Network where you are geographically.
I am in Manoa Valley of the island of Oahu in Hawaii. I'm like 15-minute drive down the hill, and I'm in Waikiki. It's completely different up here than what most people think of Hawaii. It rains pretty much every day, at least a sprinkle. The parrots are up here. I get rudely wakened every morning by the birds and the sun gently coming up and shining through my curtains. It's just a terrible place to be.
Sounds like it. How did you end up in Hawaii then? I mean, is it like, was that where you went professionally? You just ended up there and you're like, hey, I can do this stuff anywhere?
Yeah, well, I was in the Army for 25 years, and I had the pleasure of being stationed here many years ago, 2005, 6, 7, and then relocated, got what we call PCS, to permanent change of station, to Texas for 3 years. And then I didn't like that particular location, so I called my branch manager and asked to relocate again. Fortunately enough, this was on the list for places for me to come. So I came back in 2011, and we retired here after 25 years of service. We retired here 3 years ago, almost to this month. And we just decided to stay here. Ironically, now as we speak, I am doing split ops. I live currently between Tampa, Florida, and here. My family's in Tampa. I'm still here finishing up some stuff with my day job, which is at an Army Medical Center. And, we'll be getting out of here pretty soon. But while I'm here, I'm still able to continue my storytelling with the podcast and getting other people's messages out there to the world.
Well, and you can take it with you to over in Tampa too. So, right. Yeah. I mean, that's cool.
Well, here's the interesting thing about that. We talk about location. Not as much anymore, but when I first got started, about 85-90% of all the conversations I was having were out of the cab of my Toyota Tacoma pickup truck, usually sitting in a parking lot overlooking the ocean. And I just had my laptop on my lap, and I had my microphone plugged in. I was streaming off of my phone so that I could get on Skype and have the conversation. And most of the conversations are done right there out of the cab of my 2011 Toyota Tacoma.
That's awesome.
Few people know that.
I love it, man. And of course now you're in your home there, and I'm in my home office, which is awesome. So, but yeah, I mean, I've done them from my van before. I interviewed Danny Pena in season 2, and I was in my van because that's just where I had to be at the moment. So I love that mobile side of it.
Yeah.
And writing too. I mean, I'm a writer besides a podcaster, and I love to be able to write wherever I am, in a park if it's nice out, in a library, in a coffee shop, at home. So. Yeah, storytellers can be anywhere. So let's get back to this. I want to know, you said you were a bad storyteller, but now you help others do that professionally. Where does that start for you, do you think? I mean, have you always been a teller of stories in some way, and you just figured out how to do it professionally?
The way I started this whole podcast, the way it got started was I was in the process of writing a book and about living a life of abundance, living your life of abundance. And I realized I was injecting all of my stories into it. And it was just getting really long because I have a million stories. And then I just thought, you know what? I don't want it to be all about me. I don't want it to be an autobiography. I know there's other men out there, other people living this amazing life of abundance and paying it forward to the community and in some cases the world. So I got the idea. from Ryan Daniel Moran, who started a conference so that he could talk to people in person like Grant Cardone and many others. I thought, well, shoot, I was already listening to podcasts. One of the podcasts I was listening to was Entrepreneur on Fire with John Lee Dumas. And he was saying, you can start a podcast and you can start, grow, and monetize a podcast. And I was like, start and grow, I don't know about monetize, but that will be my platform to give people a reason to talk to me and share their story with me and share their message with me. That was the intent of starting this whole podcast and starting the storytelling, was because I wanted to gather these stories for the book and to share these stories. And then as it kind of rolled into it, I just became better and better and better, as we do with anything else, right? As you do things more and more, you just naturally become better, especially when you're hanging around guys, men and women. I mostly talk to guys, but I talk to ladies as well, that are just amazing storytellers. But you know what really makes their story so amazing is it's their story. It's truly their message, and they're very passionate about getting their message out there. And some of them are better storytellers than others, but when they have their heart in it, it just comes off very, very authentic, as it should.
Yeah, absolutely. And after almost about 200 shows, by the time this airs, you'll have over 200 shows out there. Any biggest lesson from listening to all those storytellers and talking to them?
Just that, exactly what you said. Just listen. Because when I first started, I still do all my own editing. And when I first started doing the editing, I would just be cutting myself out. I was cutting myself out because I was injecting my conversation myself into their story. And I like to have a dialogue. I like to talk. I always say I'm kind of a mix between John Lee Dumas with the structure, but Lewis Howes with the podcast, because he just lets it go. And some of his shows can go 2-3 hours. But I like to have that conversation, but I noticed I was really kind of cutting out a lot of what I was doing, a lot of and just things that I just really didn't want to take away from the message of the guest, right? But now I look and I can almost basically just take the whole clip and just put it on there and then put the intro and the outro, and I'm done, because I really don't have to do as much editing as I did before.
And what is it that you love most about the storytelling world? As we're talking about curating stories and listening, but you also tell them, and whether it's writing or podcasting, is there anything in particular about stories that moves you the most?
The authenticity of it. I'm a sucker for good news stories. I ask every single guest on my show to share their kick in the gut moment. And that kick in the gut moment is there for a couple reasons. One, because let's face it, the audience likes to hear those moments when people are down. You see a lot of stuff on Facebook lately with these stories about, say, let's say they had one about Sylvester Stallone, for instance, talked about where he came from. Everybody thinks, well, he's Sylvester Stallone. He's the most, badass in the world and all this stuff, and just always been good at movies and directing and all this stuff. And people still don't think he's a good actor. But the fact of the matter is he came from a very, very harsh upbringing. So I like that show, that kick in the gut moment, get people to kind of feel that, and then roll right into the enough is enough and the good news story behind it. And then if it's somebody that is helping other people, and that's part of what they do, their purpose in life, I love for them to share those good news stories to kind of still bring that up. I just love that roller coaster of emotions when people can take you through that story, and from the lowest of the lows and coming back from that. I just absolutely love them. I'm a sucker for it.
Oh yeah. So you've asked that question, around 200 times. Let's turn the tables on you then, brother. What's Wally Carmichael's kick in the gut moment?
Wow. So on a professional level, I don't know. I got to say a kick in the gut moment was honestly when I retired from the military. And I thought, I'm a retired master sergeant. I've got all this experience. I'm going to be able to land any job that I want, basically that fits my wheelhouse. Wrong answer. I got a rude awakening, and it's true for a lot of us. And it took about 4 months before I found something that really stuck. And I found something that I absolutely love. That's the reason why I'm still here in Hawaii, because I absolutely love what I do, still working around troops and stuff. But it was a kick in the gut moment to realize that, hey, it's not that I'm nobody, but I'm who I am in this world, who I was in this world over here. 25 years in the service, nobody over here in the civilian world, cares anything about that. They want to know what value you bring to the marketplace. And I had to prove myself again. So that was a bit of a kick in the gut moment.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you. I didn't say this earlier when you mentioned your service. Thank you for your service. I really appreciate that. And being you were an Army medic, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, man. So you're serving those who serve. So that's really cool. Mm-hmm. Do you find a lot of stories get told in the military then, I would guess?
Oh yeah, we are perpetual storytellers. We're telling the stories about the big fish and all that. I mean, that's what we do. We say we're going to get around. Like I was with a high school friend of mine last night. We were getting into some pretty deep conversation, but some of us will get around and we say we just standing around telling a bunch of lies because we never really know what's really going on. But we get it because we understand each other. It's different when we get somebody that's not military. And they come in and they start talking story. That's what we call it here in Hawaii, by the way. Is when we're talking conversation, we're talking story. And we can always tell somebody who's never really been in the military, but trying to act like they've been in the military or at least associated with military. Their lingo, they just don't have the right language. And we know right away, dude, don't even, so. And that's true in any industry.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that connection, that story connection, whether it's talking story in general or whether it's telling a specific story, is that what connects us in those times of anything that we're going through? I mean, because what I'm thinking is, in the military, you're in the Army, and whether you're overseas somewhere, whether you're here at home helping troops that need help, there's that roller coaster you talked about earlier, Wally, that up and down, right?
Yeah.
Is story what connects us too? It takes two lives completely unrelated, but they have military in common. Is that what connects us?
I would say yes and no. And the reason why I say that is because if you're talking story to somebody who's in your industry, let's say the military, for instance, or let's say attorneys or engineers, you automatically have that connection because you understand each other. You understand the language. So it's easier to connect with somebody. But if I'm military, and I'm standing up in front of a group of businessmen, corporate level, that's never been associated with the military. Maybe a couple of them have been, either their family or they themselves are in the military for a short period of time or whatever. But let's say a majority of them have never been associated with the military. It's much more of a skill to be able to take my leadership examples, if I'm going to be talking on something about leadership, taking that from the military and turning that into a corporate conversation. Because if I continue to use my military lingo or I use my military experience, sure, my stories of what I've done and jumping out of airplanes and rappelling out of helicopters and going, that's all exciting and neat to hear. And you can visualize that. But the deep, deep conversations that occur, that's much more of a skill to be able to share with an audience that is not familiar with your industry. So I think that's a big skill. And there's a lot of military folks out there that do that. I've had a couple military guys, that's written books, how, Navy SEALs, how to raise your kids and all kinds of stuff. So it's definitely, it's funny because I talk to these military guys who have done amazing things. I mean, most people would never even think of, but to stand up in front of a group, even though they know their skills, they stand up in front of a corporation and try to teach them something on leadership. That's where their fear comes in. So it's kind of amazing to see that.
Some of the strongest men out there, and they're the fear comes through no matter what, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to the world of podcasting, that's what we're focused on this season. What do you think is in the world of podcasting and storytelling combined? What's one of your biggest challenges, do you think?
One of my biggest challenges as far as a podcaster, because I get a lot of people contacting me. I get more and more people now that I've got more shows out there contacting me and wanting to get on the show. Mm-hmm. And I really have to vet some of these folks, and I have to say no. At first, it was like, yeah, I want people on the show. I want to get this thing going. And I was fortunate to have some really good guests from the very beginning. One being Tom Schwab, another being Aaron Walker. That got me into getting me connected with Interview Valet, got me connected with you. Because Interview Valet sends me quality all the time, every time. But a lot of folks that connect with me, I can tell that they really just want to pitch their product. They want to pitch their program or whatever, and they don't really have a message. And sometimes they have a message, but it just won't resonate with the audience. men of abundance. So at first it was hard for me to say, I don't think you're a fit. And here's why. And oh, by the way, here's a show you might be able to get on. That's where I've kind of rolled into. It's like, look, not a fit. Appreciate it. Thanks for being a listener. But here's a show you might be able to connect with. And if I know the host or I know somebody on that team, I'll connect them. But I always caveat when I make a connection with somebody, I'll say, look, I don't really know this guy. He connected me. I looked at him. Not fit for my show, maybe a fit for your show. I'm not endorsing it unless I am endorsing him. That's, somebody I know.
Yeah. And so how did you reconcile that in your mind and get to that point where you were able to say no? 'Cause that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it is. One thing that helped me, quite frankly, was a book that I just recommended to a friend last night. No More Mr. Nice Guy. And I just had to realize that, it's not, I'm not just saying no for myself because I don't feel like having this conversation with the individual. I don't want to share that. I don't want to have that conversation, go through my time, usually about an hour or so with the conversation, and then end up posting that. And it just doesn't resonate with the audience. It's just not the right message. So I don't have a problem with it anymore. I just say no. It's just not a fit. Yeah.
It's just you're just got to be okay with that, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've found that too already, and it's funny because I don't pretend to be anybody special. I mean, I do what I do in the world, and I hope I make an impact. But I've had a couple of people reach out too like that and say, "Okay, I'd like to be on your show." I'm like, "Well, it's not a good fit. Sorry," and I'm okay with it. So, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say now, though.
Well, the other thing is I've had this happen a couple of times, but one in particular I just remember it was perfect. The guy on paper really looked like he was a perfect fit for the show. And I really wanted to have a conversation with him. But the day we were supposed to connect, I sent him a Skype message. And what I usually do is I shut off all my notifications before I get on, so that Facebook's not popping in, Twitter and all this other kind of stuff. So I figured exactly the situation. But my outline, the way I do business is I've had guys tell me, I love the way you have your whole thing set up from the scheduler. The scheduler sends a reminder, has the show flow, has where I put my bio, my picture, all that stuff. It's all done. So when I open up my scheduler, it's all there. Your Skype ID. Well, for whatever reason, me and this guy couldn't get connected. And he was a referral from a past guest who was an amazing guest. Well, this guy lost his freaking mind. I mean, he really lost his mind. He was so pissed off about the whole situation. And I said, you know what? That's perfect, because this guy has a scarcity mindset. He obviously is not on the same wavelength as I am, and not everybody will be. I got that. But he just ended up, as it turned out, would not have been a good fit for the show at all. So I was glad that happened.
So I want to get to that scarcity mindset idea you just mentioned. It kind of brings up, obviously, your podcast, your coaching, everything about you is men of abundance. It's that abundance mindset. What does that mean to you? Scarcity versus abundance. What does that look like in everyday life?
Yeah. So everyday life, let's say, for instance, with entrepreneurs, you got this great idea that you want to launch, or you have this great idea for a product or a course or whatever the case may be, or maybe even on a personal level, hey, I want to buy a new house. I'm in the market for a new house or something like that. Or you want to do something big in your life. A scarcity mindset, and people with a scarcity mindset won't share that with other people. They'll keep that to themselves. Why? Because they believe if I share this with somebody else, they're going to steal it. They're going to take my idea, or they're going to wish ill upon me because I'm somewhat successful now and I can afford a new car. And so I'm not going to tell anybody about that until it's done, and they'll figure it out later, type of thing. There's some honor in that, and there's some argument on why to not tell everybody about that. And I wouldn't say blast it out on Facebook and blast it out in the world, but you should have a group of people, men or women, whatever your mastermind group is or whatever, a group of people, family members that you like, know, and trust, that you can share stuff like that with. On the opposite of that, an abundance mindset is, I've got this amazing idea. I've heard people actually, one of my guests actually, and I'm not going to remember his name right now, he wanted to write a book. So he put it on Facebook and said, I'm going to write this book. I've wanted to write this book forever. I'm going to have it done by this date. And for everybody who puts a comment on this post right here that says, some sort of encouragement, if I don't have the book done by this date, I'm going to give each and every one of you $100. It got up to where it was like going to be like $5,000 if he didn't get this book done. But he was doing that because he wanted that encouragement, and he had an abundance mindset, and he knew that the people in his circle were going to encourage him. Now, he said a lot of people were replying and saying, hey, keep the money. I just want to reply so that, there's one more $100 bill you got to give away if you don't, do this. And then if you give me the money, I'm going to donate it. I don't need the money. I just want to make sure I'm doing my part to push you along. So the abundance mindset, once I realized that I have this life of abundance and changed my life never really had a super scarcity mindset, but kind of opening my mind up, so much more started coming into my life. As opposed to kind of keeping stuff to myself entirely. But I still don't push stuff out there. That I have personal things I don't talk about, but I have mastermind groups that I'm a part of that I, just open up to. And these guys are just amazing in at least just listening. That's all I want sometimes, but other times I need some advice. So if you have a scarcity mindset, you're just closing off so much from your life, as opposed to having a mindset of abundance and just, sharing stuff with the world and expecting so much more to come back tenfold.
And do you think that mastermind world has impacted the success of your storytelling? Would you give that as advice to somebody?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I don't know of anybody personally that is, super successful in any means of their life that isn't a part of some sort of, whether you call it a mastermind group, a men's church group, and I'm not talking about a group of guys that you sit around and watch the game with and drink beer and smoke cigars with. That's all you talk about is the game, how good the cigar is and how good the beer is. I'm talking about guys that you can have deep, serious conversations with, get pissed at each other, sometimes cry for each other, and truly feel our emotions, get our emotions and get the stuff out on, talk about something my wife did this week that I just don't understand. I've been married 25 years. So a lot of guys are always throwing stuff at me in regards to that. Like I got it all figured out and I don't, but I have the curse of knowledge and I know where I can help a little bit here and there, but it's absolutely critical to have it be a part of at least one mastermind group. I'm a member of 3.
And do you stick with those guys for a while so you get to know, like, and trust them? Mm-hmm. You don't bounce every year I have a new group that I change?
No, usually I stick with, there's one group that I've been with for quite a while, but I do start with other groups just because I want to get a different perspective. I'm part of a dad's group. I'm part of a group of it's not really, it is a mastermind, but it's a podcast group with podcast websites. And we communicate a lot in there, just talking about our challenges with our guests or equipment or whatever the case may be. And we always help each other out. But the dad's group is really, really powerful for me. And then just another business group that I have that, it started out as kind of a business group, but it's really more of a, hey, I got my business figured out. How do I get my family life kind of to come along with that or, fix this part over here? Because that's most of the guys I end up talking to for my Men of Abundance community is just that they got the business part figured out, but the family part's falling apart. Once you get the family part fixed, the business does even better. Mm-hmm. Most guys just think they got to focus on not just business, but their job as well.
Mm. So what I hear you saying is it's not, you called it a mastermind, and that's what it is by nature, but it's more than that. Because when I hear mastermind, I think of like you mentioned Aaron Walker earlier, great man. He has a mastermind group, Iron Sharpens Iron, and right. It costs money to get in. They meet every week. They read a book every month. They really challenge each other. It's awesome. But it's more than that. It's other groups. Like I heard you mention the podcast group. So I'm a member of a couple different podcast group on Facebook. That's the kind of stuff you're talking about. It doesn't have to necessarily be completely structured is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Now the dad's group, we get on a call. There's several calls that we can get on, but I get on a call once a week. And it's a Zoom call, and there's anywhere from 5 to 15 or 20 of us on there on the Zoom, and all of our, some of us are walking through the shopping mall because we get on, wherever we're at when we can. And we're just having these conversations with each other, basically face to face. And it's very powerful to be able to do that.
Technology is pretty amazing for that, isn't it?
It is.
And speaking of technology, how do you think that media and technology affects the craft of storytelling?
It takes it to a different skill. I think it certainly enhances it, but I see so many people, specifically in the marketing arena where they're trying to tell their story to the wrong people in the wrong way. How you tell your story on Facebook is different than how you tell your story on Twitter and how you tell your story on Instagram and Pinterest. You have to know those mediums, and you have to know the audiences that are there. Again, it's all about talking to your audience and where they're at. Sometimes it's a visual story. Sometimes it's a written story. Sometimes it's video, and video, as you know, is now. People keep saying, well, video is the future. No, video's been now for several years. If you're not on video, you're missing the boat, especially if you're a marketer, you have some sort of a business.
So you talk about audience, like which audience is where. How did you figure out who your audience was for Men of Abundance or other things that you do? How did you do that research?
Google Analytics.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I just started pushing it out there and the website, and started, certain people started sharing it. Everything's word of mouth with Men of Abundance. I've paid zero for marketing for Men of Abundance. It's all word of mouth. And it's in, last I checked, 63 countries, or been downloaded in 63 countries. I look at, then as I started getting into it, I initially wanted to write out my avatar. Who did I want to talk to? And I pretty much had it kind of spot on. It was pretty close, actually. The way, when I go back and look at my avatar and I look at the Google Analytics of who's actually visiting the website, because you can't really see that on who's listening to the podcast. I can only really see who's going to the website. And that avatar, pretty much, what did surprise me though is I was talking to men, and 38% of the listeners, or the people that visit the website anyway, are women consistently. And it's been that way for over a year and a half.
And why do you think that is? Why are women coming?
That's a good question. Initially, I thought it was because they were looking for an abundance of men when they were searching on, I don't know, when they were searching on Google. But no, they're sticking around, and I'm getting good feedback from the ladies too. The ladies really like listening. It's just the same reason why I like to listen to some women's shows too, because I try to, I think it's easier to figure out men than it is women. But then again, I'm a man. So, but I listen to the ladies' shows as well to get a different perspective. And I have women guests on the show because, let's face it, we don't have it all figured out, and we have a lot to learn from women. So I think it's great to get that perspective. I'm honored. I've actually had one lady contact me, a spouse, and she's asked me if I coached men in living a life of abundance or anything of that nature. And she wanted me to coach her husband because they were living well, but he was always at work. He was focused on his business, and he wasn't focused on her or the kids and where she wanted, and what I did was I told her I'm very honored, have him listen to the show. And oh, by the way, go pick up the book called 5 Love Languages and see where you're falling short at possibly, and have him read it. You guys read it together. And I think that's a great book for that particular situation.
I love that book. Love that whole idea of the love languages. Yeah. I use that for my kids, my wife.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me and my boy are definitely physical. My little guy, he loves to sit and cuddle and hold and hug and stuff like that. And my wife and my other 2 boys, not so much. They're, the other 4, one of the other 4. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And cool. And cool too of you to, rather than say, here's how I can fix your husband, to say to her, hey, look, see where you can make some improvements, and then encourage him, not just try to nag him. So that's cool.
Right. Yeah.
I like that. Now, do you have, when it comes to storytelling for Wally, when you get ready to tell a story, or you talking about writing your book earlier, do you have an inspiration that you go to that gets you juiced up for telling a story?
Man, there's so many when it comes to that. But when it comes to I'd have to say, when it comes to living, I've listened to so many guys over the years, and I don't know that any one of them, I guess, would have to do with what I'm going to talk about or the story I'm going to tell. But I wished I just had, first off, I wished I had the voice of Mike Rowe, because it don't matter what he says. It sounds good. And my wife is in love with that dude. I'm going to get him on the show one of these days. But I want to be able to, here's one of the things, I think it was, who was the author that said, you probably know this. He said something to the effect of, I was going to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long one. And I'm going to think of it in a minute. One of the listeners was saying, I know, they're raising their hand, because it's a very popular author. But the point is it's harder to tell short stories than it is to tell a long story, because you have to really think about the words that you're using and how you're going to communicate. And that's much of what we do in the podcasting world, because we could sit here for hours and have this long conversation and quite frankly, put people to sleep. But it's more like adding on to bullet points, making bullet points really flow very well to tell a very good story, especially when we're talking about marketing. You want to really grab the attention with, of the listener, the reader, the watcher, whatever the medium that we're using, and then tell the short story, and then, kind of roll into it and keep them captivated. It's just like sitcoms. You look at sitcoms, they're short little spurts just to keep you long enough to get you to the next commercial,
Right. Exactly.
So I think, to answer your question, some of the greats that I've listened to over the years, Brian Tracy. I remember being in Germany and going to the library, post-library, and picking up cassette tapes of Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar. Some of these guys. One of my favorite guys these days is Les Brown. Guy's got the most infectious laugh. It just kills me every time.
Well, I'm going to lay down the gauntlet so you can get Mike Rowe on the show first, because he's one of my dreams too. So
Yeah,
there you go. Oh, and what I heard you say there too, Wally, is, when I said, what's your inspiration? You said so many different places, so many men that I listen to, so many shows, so many. So what I hear you saying is that don't just pick one thing, but surround yourself with great storytellers, with great people, with great resources, and just be steeped in it, and the inspiration will come from that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a very good point, and also that I see so many people try to emulate, Zig Ziglar or any Jim Rohn. A lot of people try to go after. Lately, so many people for many years, not as much lately, but Tony Robbins. Everybody to want to be Tony Robbins and throw out their F-bombs, and they want to be, I don't know that what is his name? I can't think of his name. I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, let's stick with Tony Robbins. Look at the message, and get all these different ways of telling the story, because there is an art to it, but inject yourself into it. Be who you are. Otherwise, it's never going to come off authentic. It's always going to come off just icky, and it's not going to, you're not going to get your message across like you want to.
So getting your message across like you want to, how are we supposed to do that in today's world, do you think? With so much out there, you mentioned almost every social media, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, they're all different. If I'm a storyteller today and I have a story to get out there, what would you advise me on? What should I do?
Well, I would ask you, what kind of story are you trying to tell? And, I would tell you first, who do you want to talk to? I have to ask those questions, because I can't really answer that unless I really know who you want to talk to, what's the purpose of your message, and then based off of that, we can kind of get an idea of where your audience is at. That's too easy these days to find out where your audience is at. And if we're talking from a marketing standpoint, from say a business, or whether it's a traditional brick and mortar type of business or an online business, you have to, number one, like I said, know who your audience is. So in the business terms, we call that niche down to who you want to talk to, be specific, and then grab their attention. And how you grab their attention is going to be different based on if you're using radio, TV, internet, Facebook. Internet's widespan, that's broad. So Facebook, like you said, Pinterest, who it is you're talking to. So like Pinterest, for instance, and Instagram, pictures. It's got to be huge, amazing, dynamic, brilliant colors with pictures and not a whole lot of words. Facebook, you got to have a video out there in the beginning of the video, and maybe a captivating subject line or something like that that's to intro the video. But the video's got to start off it's got to grab my attention in the first 2.5 seconds before I'm even going to click on the darn thing. And then you got to kind of go into it, and then you got to be kind of short. I see so many guys out there that have amazing messages, but they're doing their Facebook Live videos, for instance, and as soon as I see a Facebook Live and I know the guy and I want to listen to the message and I click on it and it's an hour and a half long, I'm not going there, man. It's done. My attention span is just like everybody else's. I just don't have that much time.
So not one answer to get our stories out. Where you got to start is who do you want to reach and where are they?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what's your message?
And what's the message? I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned Facebook Lives. I love your Facebook Lives. I mean, first of all, they're in Hawaii, so why wouldn't I? You've always got a great message, and you're a good dude that I admire. So I enjoy getting those notifications for you. How often do you do those? Is it just kind of when spur of the moment? Do you plan them out? How are you using Facebook Live strategically?
I really haven't lately. I haven't been doing a whole lot of Facebook Live videos, and I do truly enjoy doing them. Part of the reason why I like doing them on the beach and with the water in the background is that if people don't want to hear what I have to say, at the very least, they have something nice to look at.
Right.
So, but other than that, there's no real strategy to it. It's just kind of like when I feel compelled, something's going on in my life, or I notice something, I just jump on Facebook Live real quick and share my thoughts about it, and ask questions. And I always like to ask the questions and see what other people think. I like to poke a few people as well and kind of get people to get their mind thinking and go through. And sometimes it gets into a heated conversation, which is cool, because I think that's more of what this world needs is much more conversation, less emotion, much more conversation. Nothing wrong with emotions, but when emotions are involved in conversations, there's very little understanding going on.
I like that. So understanding rather than emotion. That's a good one. That's a hard one in today's social media world, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because everybody's got their opinion. Everybody believes that their truth is the truth. And nobody likes to be proven wrong. Mm-hmm. And even when they are proven wrong, they're going to push back. And even when they know in their heart and logically, okay, what I've been told doesn't make sense. What I thought I knew doesn't make sense based on this information. And my conversation I'm having with this individual who is, let's use prejudice, for instance. I had a conversation with Christian Picciolini, who grew up in Chicago and was a white supremacist for many, many years, and now has a program called Life After Hate. And he's helped about 100 people get out of the movement. And what he does to help people to share his story and to get his message across is he will take somebody who's homophobic or, doesn't like Jews, or, a black guy who doesn't like white guys, or vice versa. He'll take them out to dinner with that other person, that other family. Mm-hmm. And they will sit down and have dinner together as part of their and he doesn't force it. He lets them realize for themselves, like he did. That's in you can go listen to the episode, but I love how he does that, because he gets you in front of the people and lets you realize your own lies, that you've been told that your truth isn't the truth.
Life after hate. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because I've been thinking about that lately as a middle-aged, middle-class white guy in America. Mm-hmm. I recognize the privilege that I've had over the years, and I'm trying to understand what that means and not take it personally, right? Not say, well, I'm not privileged. I didn't grow up rich. Like, that's not what this means. And I've been thinking about how to have those conversations just myself. And I'm not a white supremacist kind of guy, but I thought, man, how can I surround myself with people that have that conversation? So I'm gonna have to check that one out. I want to hear Christian's story. So
and that brings up another part of the conversation I just had with a friend of mine, one of the guys in my group in the abundance community, because one of my last guests mentioned that he went to a gay rally apprehensively, not being gay, and he had some concerns and some fears. And one of my guys that's in my Men of Abundance community, he chimed in. This is an Army veteran, a guy I've known for years. And he chimed in and said, I found that very interesting. And I asked him to elaborate. And he said, well, what I found interesting about it was that he was fearful of going to a gay rally. Like, why would you be afraid of us gay guys, of us gay men? And number one, that's when I found out that this guy was gay.
There you go. Yeah.
To be honest with you, I've known this guy for years and never knew he was gay, which, you don't go around saying, hey, I'm gay, any more than you say, hey, I like, bananas on my peanut butter type of thing, okay, no big deal. But I thought about that and I was like, well, yeah, I'm not a biker. So I would feel kind of uncomfortable going and hanging around at a biker rally per se, because I don't know the conversation. I don't know anything about that type of thing, and I kind of take it into that context, and I'm working. That's another video that I'm kind of working on in another episode of the show, to have that conversation. Kind of going off track here a little bit, but I thought it was relevant to what you're saying about, obviously a white guy. I grew up in a trailer. We were so poor. I grew up, and this sounds like it's made up, but I grew up in a trailer behind another man's house because we couldn't even afford the trailer park. I mean, that's literally, and there were times when we didn't have any utilities hooked up, no gas, water, electricity, and I would have to go stay the week at a friend's house just so that I could get a shower and stuff like this. My mom would say, "Hey, go find somebody that you can stay the week with," or something like that. So it's either hot or it's cold in Phoenix, Arizona, because it does get cold. And I want you guys to be comfortable and get closer to school, because my mom would leave the house at 4:00 in the morning to take the bus to work and wouldn't be home till 7 in the evening. So me and my brother would fend for ourselves, and it was kind of, so I say that only because everybody thinks, well, if you grew up in the ghetto, you have it tough, and it is tough. There are gangbangers where I was at, but I'm not going to compare myself with somebody from Phoenix, Arizona to Chicago or LA or something like that. Just understand that we all have our past and our background, and you never really know what that is.
We all have our stories, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
And I think understanding those stories and having a desire to understand those stories bridges that gap of humanity between, I grew up in a very Midwestern, middle class town, basically one race, and you're looking at it, for those on video. So not a whole lot of diversity, and it was a great upbringing. I had a great childhood, but man, if I can hear other stories and connect with people, I'll never understand exactly what someone goes through in the downtown Chicago, whether they're white or not. So hearing their stories and being willing to is so important.
Well, and that's the thing, again, where I grew up at, if you ever watched the movie Spare Parts with George Lopez, that high school is the high school I graduated from. It was maybe 10% Caucasian, predominantly Hispanic. And I could not go tonight and walk through that neighborhood unless there was somebody that's from the neighborhood and with me. Otherwise, there would be some issues. But the other thing is, as you said it, being willing to listen to somebody else's story. And sometimes stories are told from one, maybe two perspectives. A perfect example is our history books. When I was growing up, the way the history books were written, they were written by one group of people, and it portrayed an image of several other groups of people. For instance, Native Americans were savages and, killing white men and raping their women and all this stuff. Well, no, the reality was they were protecting their land. They were trying to protect their well-being and their way of life and not be converted into Christianity. And then, you got the whole story about the slaves and how they were portrayed in the history books that I was taught in school. So the stories were being told from one perspective. And now some of those history books, rightfully so in my mind, are being rewritten, and closer to the truth is being shared. If you're going to study history and get multiple stories instead of just the one side.
Absolutely. And if you ever want to get into one of those biker rallies, let me know. I'll get you in. We'll
Perfect. I appreciate that.
So I look at you as someone who has made it, maybe not to retire from life in general and everything else and be like, sitting on a throne somewhere, but somebody who's living a life of abundance, who is living a life of deliberate choices. And so you're someone in my mind who has made it. Do you consider yourself at that point in life?
I actually do, when you put it into that perspective. I will never be that guy sitting on a throne. I will never be that guy that's completely retired. I have my own views about retirement in general. And nobody ever retires. I mean, I say that because peers of mine and even my uncle, who retired after 30 years in the military, when they sit around and do nothing, you die. If you're not contributing, if you're not growing, you're dying. So I will always work in one fashion or another, even if volunteering my time. But I've made it in my mind. I've completely 100% made it in my mind. That's part of living a life of abundance. It's not about a dollar figure. if you listen to the show, I talk to people who are multimillionaires and I talk to people who are not. And when it all comes down to it, it's the mindset. Even the guys that are multimillionaires, they realized at one point in their life, like Timothy Sykes, who was very young multimillionaire and then started traveling the world and realized how much he has and others don't, started the Timothy Sykes Foundation, wrote $1 million check to Pencils of Promise, and oh, by the way, went and helped build the schools in all these developing countries. That Pencils of Promise, if you don't know, build schools around developing countries. And once you realize in your mind that if you're listening to this right now, you are living a life of abundance, because whether you believe it or not, you just got to get to where you believe it, because you have access to resources that millions of people don't. And I'm telling you, I've been to 23 countries on 5 continents. I've been to true, serious poverty. I saw a kid in Bolivia on the side of the street. She had like a sore on her face, and you could see it hadn't been tended to at all. And being a medic, I just couldn't let that go. So I went to this drugstore that was down the street. They don't have a whole lot. I got some stuff and I helped her out with it. And while I was there, I bought some peanut brittle and stuff. And I gave that to her. And even before I did that, she was a happy little girl. She was sitting there playing with her little, homemade dolls and stuff like that. And didn't even realize that the rest of the world lives the way that they do, nor do I really think she cared. But she obviously wasn't being tended to. But she was a happy little girl. And when I took care of her, gave her the stuff, it really made her day even better, I would hope. But again, I say that because out in the interior of Panama or even Bolivia, where we were drilling water wells, the people they lived in dirt huts out in Bolivia. And these people would give you the shirt off their back. They invite you in the house, they feed you, and they're just amazing people. So, and they don't have the luxuries that we have. I don't even know if they know about the luxuries that we have, but they're truly living amazing lives. I'll tell you that.
Abundance, even in the face of what we would consider poverty, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So at what point do you remember kind of thinking to yourself, I think I've made it? That you had that abundant attitude, you had that I've made it attitude. Is there anything in particular that made you think that?
Yeah. So it was about 4 years ago. I was sitting out on the beach where I lived. Before I lived up here in Manoa, I lived out on the beach out on the west side of Oahu. And I'm sitting there with my cup of coffee. My son's playing in the water. My wife's back in the house with my other boy. And one of my other boys, the other one's grown out. And I'm listening to a podcast. And even though I'm listening to the podcast, I'm listening to this guy's story. And then it rings into my head this conversation that my wife would always have with me over the years. What the hell are you chasing? I was always after that 6 and 7 figure income. And I'd be at work, come home, put on a suit, go sell Amway. Come home, go sell USANA Health Sciences. Come home, go try to start some other business, satellite business. Go start some other business, start some other thing. Always trying to get into where I'm, having this life of freedom and all this stuff. And then I look around and it all came. It was like it just all came in. And I was like, you know what? I have I made it 6-figure income at that point, and nothing had changed in my mind. I was still chasing it. But, oh, by the way, I'm not out in the water playing with my kid. I was sitting on the gazebo listening to a podcast to learn how to make more money and to learn how to be successful and to learn how to make it. And I'm using air quotes for those of you who aren't on video. And then my son's out there and he's like, Dad, come and play. And I'm like, no, let me, do this. I'm listening. I shut it off. I just put it down, put it on the table, went out and played with the kid, went back to the house. I can get emotional about this. It was a very real event. And once, and then after that, it was like, I got introduced to this guy who, Snow is his last name. I'm drawing a blank on names today. He lives over on Maui. He actually left and he came back, but he teaches people. I was invited to this conference, tiny little conference, where I actually met one of the original cast members of Hawaii Five-0. The guy used to say, "Book him, Dano." I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was there, and basically it was all about how to write, the importance of writing a book and telling your story. Ironically enough, right? So I paid for this guy's course, and I started to write this book. And I thought, well, what am I going to title this book? What am I going to do? So he consulted with me. We sat down. He said, "What's going on in your life? Blah, blah, blah. What message would you like to share?" I was like, I had just recently had this revelation. That's why. And then I bought the domain name, Living Your Life of Abundance. And that was kind of where, a long story to where that all came from.
That's awesome. I like that.
Yeah.
A lot of good stuff in there to inspire those storytellers who are out there. So very cool.
Yeah.
So if you had it in you, you're obviously a storyteller and you talk story on the island, as you said earlier. I love that whole idea of just talking story. But if you only could tell one last story, what would that be for you?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it would just be something about living your life. Just live your life, and the multiple examples that I could share, both from the podcast and personal conversations that I've had in my own personal experience. Just live your life. Live today. It's always, I'm going to wait till the kids are out of school to take that, vacation. I'm going to wait till we have this much in the bank. I'm going to wait till tomorrow, someday is not a day on the calendar. Put the date that you want to do stuff on the calendar. Don't ask me how it works. It works itself out, man. You just got to be intentional about it, but just live your life and live it today. Don't wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow it's not guaranteed.
Indeed. Well, thanks for your time today, Wally. I do appreciate it, brother. That was great. Where's the best place for people to connect with you anywhere?
Well, number one, I have two websites, actually. I have menofabundance.com. And for the guys out there who want to get into the Men of Abundance community, you can just click on the members only tab at the top of the page, and you'll be able to get access. It's a Facebook group. So if you're not on Facebook, I got it. I respect that. But this is a men's only Facebook group. And the other one is where I'm helping business owners tell their story, increase their profits, not just from getting new leads and new clients, but actually talking to their current clients and increasing profits. And you can find that at apmasterycoach.com. And there's videos galore there that you can take a look at.
Awesome. And your social media and all that stuff is on there too? Like on Men of Abundance? Cool.
Yeah. Social media is all at the upper left-hand corner of Men of Abundance. It's all up there.
Awesome. We'll put those in the show notes, brother.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your time today, man. I appreciate you taking time out of the beautiful Hawaiian day to talk to me in Michigan, man.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Absolutely. Aloha, brother.
So thank you so much to our guest, Wally Carmichael. Be sure to visit him online. You can find all of those links mentioned in the show notes at thestorytellersnetwork.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it all over the place, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, anywhere that you think storytellers would hear it and benefit from it. I appreciate that. And also, if you enjoyed it, leave us a review if you would, right? In fact, here's what I wanted to share. I enjoy reading these to you listeners. Aaron Walker, author of View from the Top, and the guy that we mentioned earlier in the episode, actually, says, I was introduced to Dan at Podcast Movement in 2017, and he told me about this podcast, and I was hooked from the beginning. What a great way to learn. Thank you, Dan, for the awesome show. Well, thank you, Aaron. And I do hope that it is a great way to learn. So, and hopefully an inspiration too. Pretty cool too that one of my guests from early on is also a listener. So I think that's pretty cool. So there you go. Hey, listen, once again, appreciate you listening to the Storytellers Network. Find us online at storytellersnetwork.com. If you have suggestions for guests, you can email me. I'll take them. But I got some great guests coming up here. We're getting pretty close to the end of season 2. Season 3 coming up is going to be video creators. And I have a great list of amazing guests for you. I cannot wait to share their stories as well. So there you go. Hey, until next time, here's to telling our stories and having stories to tell. Cheers and aloha.